So again, good noon to our 12 noon class in horticulture. So in continuation ng ating topic last time, which is actually all about photosynthesis. So we are now actually discussing about the different photosystems now in the process of photosynthesis. So we have stopped on slide 33, which is all about non-cyclic electron flow. So remember that in the non-cyclic electron flow, we have ADP and plus the phosphate group or the phosphate to produce the ATP. And we also have the and the second one for the production ng NADPH, which is NADP plus the hydrogen ions. So oxygens come from the splitting of water and not carbon dioxide. So from water, we have 1/2 oxygen and 2 hydrogen. So that's for the non-cyclic electron flow. Now for the chemiosmosis, this is what powers the ATP synthesis. No, and it takes place across the thylakoid membrane and uses the electron transport chain and the ATP synthase enzyme, where hydrogen move down their concentration gradient through channels of ATP synthase, forming ATP from ADP. So Helandri, if you have questions or clarification, just turn on your mic or naka-turn on na ata yan. So while waiting for your classmates to come in, no, and so that's all about chemiosmosis. Next to chemiosmosis is this is actually what shown in the diagram is the chemiosmosis, where inside the thylakoid membrane, this is what happened, no, wherein we produce ATP and an ADPH, no, inside the thylakoid. So next is the Calvin cycle. So this is the last step of photosynthesis. We're in carbon fixation with the presence without the presence of light or the light independent reaction. We have the C3 plants. This belong to 80% of all plants on Earth. So the normal Calvin cycle is done by all the C3 plants, which are exactly the same. Exactly the same na most of our plants, no, here. So again, it occurs in the stroma, and this again uses the ATP and NADPH from light reaction as energy, uses the carbon dioxide to produce glucose, and it takes six turns and uses 18 ATP and 12 NADPH as a whole. So you can see this is where the stroma inside the chloroplast. This is where the Calvin cycle occurs. So this is just to explain you further, kasi we have done in the previous discussion, we have done a video presentation on the steps of photosynthesis and the Calvin cycle or the C3 fixation. This is starting with the glucose, where it is where it goes different process, no, as you can see here, for 6 ATP, 30 carbons, 6 carbons, 36 carbons, and up to another glucose. So the Calvin cycle is C3, which is glucose, no? So next is photorespiration, and this occurs in hot, dry, bright days, where stomates close and the fixation of the oxygen instead of carbon dioxide is done, no? So aside from the normal C3 process, we also have photorespiration wherein the in this stage the stomata closes, so they only fix oxygen instead of the carbon dioxide, and they produce the 2C molecules instead of the 3 carbon sugar molecules, so produces no sugar molecules therefore and no ATP. Okay, so photorespiration in plants have special adaptations to limit the effect of photorespiration. So now we have, aside from C3 plants, we have adaptation known as the C4 plants and the CAM plants. Now, what are C4 plants? These are plants which thrives in hot, moist environments, which comprises 15% of our plants on Earth. No, that includes the grasses, the corn, and the sugar cane. While photosynthesis may occur in 2 places in this type of plants, no? Pwede silang sa light reaction mesophyll cells and in the Calvin cycle in the bundle sheath cell. So these are the two specific characteristics of the C4 plants, which I've already also discussed in the previous video presentation that we have. So in the C4 plants again, it's inside the mesophyll cell where ATP is produced and the malate 4C sugar is being produced. And in the bundle sheath cell, it is transported in where the glucose, where malate is produced for glucose and also for the vascular tissue. So another, aside from the C4 plants, are the crassulacean acid metabolism or CAM plants. No, this also thrives in hot, dry environments, and this comprises 5% of plants such as the cactus and the ice plants. And in this instance, the stomata as well close during the day and only open during the night because they conserve water, no, and therefore carbon dioxide is not fixed at that time of the day. So the light reaction only occurs during the day, while the Calvin cycle occurs when carbon dioxide is present. So this is what happens in the crassulacean acid metabolism. So again, in CAM plants, you can see that the stomata open during night and close during day. So this is what happens during night. Again, the ATP is used for the production of 3 carbons and into 4 carbons malate, and inside the vacuole, the malate is transferred and to produce glucose when the stomata is closed. So that is exactly all the events happening in CAM plants photosynthesis. So now the question, does CAM plants close their stomata in the hottest part of the day to conserve water? So is it yes or no? Anyone? So if you can just turn on your mic and answer, you can answer the question, no, if you want to. So of course the answer is yes, no. This is their main characteristic because this plants thrives in hot and or desert environment, so their stomata close during or the hottest part of the day. So and lastly, okay, so why do, sorry na, end pala siya. Why do CAM plants close their stomata during the day? And it is because CAM plants close their stomata in the hottest part of the day to conserve water. No? So that's the question actually, and the answer is this one. Sorry for that. So do you have any question or clarification regarding photosynthesis? So we can move on respiration, no? So for the respiration, actually, saan na ba yun? Wait lang. Hindi ko ata na-open. Okay, sorry for that. Supposedly, saan na ba yun? Nawala yung aking, open lang natin 15 respiration. So, do you have any question or clarification regarding photosynthesis? So, we can discuss about respiration now. Ma'am, excuse me, di lagi madog tingog ni ma'am. Ha? Dili madungog. Are you sure? How about this? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, buti na lang. So, sorry kanina, waday mo nakadungog. So now we're going to talk about cellular respiration, no? But before that, let me show you a video presentation about cellular respiration, no? So let's talk about what is cellular respiration. So I actually have, yes, cellular respiration video here. Madungog ninyo?
Mainly because when I wake up in the morning, it just takes a while for me to get my energy back. It takes a lot of time and coffee for that to happen for me. Cells really don't have that luxury. They are busy performing cell processes all the time. Active transport of many substances needed for their survival, for example. And the energy currency they need, specifically, is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's a type of nucleic acid, actually, and it is action-packed with 3 phosphates. We have a video all about ATP and how it works as an energy currency. So where am I going with this? Well, cells have to make this ATP. It doesn't really matter what kind of cell you are. Prokaryote or eukaryote, you have to make ATP. The process for making that ATP can be different, however, depending on that type of cell. One way is called aerobic cellular respiration. Lots of organisms can do aerobic cellular respiration, but this video is specifically going to go into aerobic cellular respiration in eukaryotic cells. That means this video is talking about the process within cells that have membrane-bound organelles, such as the nucleus and mitochondria. Eukaryotic cells include the cells you find in protists, fungi, animals, and plants. The mitochondria, which can be found in most eukaryotic cells, are going to be kind of a big deal in this aerobic cellular respiration because some of the process occurs in the mitochondria. So let's get started. Remember, the major goal for any organism performing this is to make ATP. Okay, here's the overall look at the equation for aerobic cellular respiration. Remember that reactants, inputs, are on the left side of the arrow, and products, outputs, are on the right side of the arrow. This equation, by the way, looks remarkably similar. Look at how the reactants and products are on different sides. Well, that doesn't mean they're simply opposites. It does show that they have substances in common. In photosynthesis, organisms make glucose. Notice how glucose is a product. But in cellular respiration, organisms break the glucose down to make ATP. Fun fact, you know how when a bean seed first germinates in the ground, to do photosynthesis yet? Yeah, the germinating bean is relying on glucose it has stored, and it's doing cellular respiration to make ATP. so it can grow. Of course, once it starts to mature and develop, it can do photosynthesis. Both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Plants make glucose in photosynthesis, and they break it down in cellular respiration. They can do both. But if you aren't photosynthetic, such as a human or an amoeba, you have to find a food source to get your glucose. You need glucose to get this process started, and we're going to assume that we're starting with one glucose molecule. Step 1, glycolysis. This step takes place in the cytoplasm, and this step does not require oxygen. It's considered anaerobic. In glycolysis, glucose, the sugar from the equation, is converted into a more usable form called pyruvate. Glycolysis usually takes a little ATP itself to start up. The net yield from this step is approximately 2 pyruvate and 2 ATP molecules. And 2 NADH. What is NADH? NADH is a coenzyme, and it has the ability to transfer electrons, which will be very useful in making even more ATP later on. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, an intermediate step occurs. The 2 pyruvate are transported by active transport into the mitochondria, specifically the mitochondrial matrix. In the mitochondria, pyruvate is oxidized. The 2 pyruvate are converted to 2-acetyl-CoA, which will be used by the next step. Carbon dioxide is released and 2 NADH are produced. Step 2, the Krebs cycle, also called the citric acid cycle, still in the mitochondrial matrix. The citric acid cycle is considered an aerobic process. While the cycle doesn't directly consume oxygen, some of the events in the cycle need oxygen to continue. To learn more about this intricate cycle where the 2-acetyl-CoA will enter, check out the further reading suggestions in the video details. Carbon dioxide is released. We also produce 2 ATP, 6 NADH, and 2 FADH. FADH is also a coenzyme, like NADH, and it will also assist in transferring electrons to make even more ATP. Step 3, the electron transport chain in chemiosmosis. This is just a beautiful thing, really. In eukaryotic cells, this is still in the mitochondria, and to be more specific, it's involving the inner mitochondrial membrane. We do require oxygen for this aerobic step. This is a very complex process, and we are greatly simplifying it by saying that electrons are transferred from the NADH and FADH to protein complexes in electron carriers. The electrons are used to generate a proton gradient, as the protons are pumped across to the intramembrane space. All these protons being pumped out into this intramembrane space generates an electrical and chemical gradient. The thing is, if you remember from our cell transport video, ions, like pH+, don't easily travel across membranes directly without something to travel through. The protons can travel through an amazing enzyme called ATP synthase. If I could be any enzyme, I'd be ATP synthase because it has the ability to make ATP by adding a phosphate to ADP. ADP is a precursor to ATP. ADP has 2 phosphates, but if it obtains a 3rd phosphate, it becomes ATP. So, in chemiosmosis, the protons travel down their electrochemical gradient through a portion of the ATP synthase, powering it to make ATP, the ultimate goal. Oxygen is the final acceptor of the electrons. When oxygen combines with 2 hydrogens, you get H2O, water. If you remember from our equation, water is a listed product. Now, the electron transport chain in chemiosmosis step makes a lot more ATP compared to the other 2 previous steps. How much? So I've noticed in my years of teaching and the assortment of textbooks I've collected over the years, there are some different numbers in cellular respiration charts. In fact, you can even see them change a bit in different editions of the same book. And it's made me want to emphasize that it's important to not just memorize a number, because it really is more of a range. I want to focus less on the number of ATP made per glucose molecule because it depends on a lot of variables. One variable is the gradient we were talking about. How many protons were pumped across the mitochondrial membrane? You can see more variables discussed in the factual references, and those references have estimates ranging from 26 to 34 molecules of ATP per glucose molecule in the electron transport chain in chemiosmosis step alone. Then, if you add the other 2 steps, Krebs, otherwise known as the citric acid cycle, and glycolysis, you can estimate a range of anywhere between 30 to 38 net ATP molecules total per molecule of glucose. Again, to emphasize a range. Now, this was just one way of creating ATP. But like we had said at the beginning, all cells have to make ATP, but the way they do it can differ. If there's no oxygen available, some cells have the ability to perform a process known as fermentation. It sounds efficient, but you can still make ATP when there isn't oxygen. We have a video about that. We can't emphasize enough how important the process of making ATP is for cells. For example, cyanide, which is found in some rat poisons, can block a step in the electron transport chain, which would block ATP production. A poison that prevents ATP from being produced can be deadly. With the important role that mitochondria have in ATP production, there is also a demand for increased research on mitochondrial diseases. We are confident that the understanding of how to treat these diseases will continue to improve as more people like you ask questions. Well, that's it for the Nuba Sisters, and we invite you to stay here.
Okay, so that's it about photosynthesis. That is just a simple na very, what do you call that, very simple presentation of what is or how does ATP is being, you know, in plants, no. So do you have any questions regarding the presentation? So we can start with our usual lectures on cellular respiration. Okay, so just turn on your mic if you want to speak something, okay? So again, we have seen the cellular respiration can be done based on the presentation that we have just seen. This can be done in all sorts of different types of animals, from human beings, in plants, and also animals, no? Or so less cellular respiration is actually a catabolic exergonic oxygen requiring process that uses energy which are extracted from macromolecules, or usually glucose, to produce energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate and water. So this is actually comprised of an equation that is opposite lang sa photosynthesis. So if you remember, the photosynthesis with the presence of carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight, this produces the glucose and with the release of oxygen. But in cellular respiration, it is now time to utilize glucose para makapag-produce tayo ng energy. So in this case, glucose C6H12O6 and with the presence of oxygen are converted to ATP as our energy source. So this is cellular respiration. And in the end part of the discussion last time, we have learned that cellular respiration can occur with or without oxygen, but this is actually an oxygen requiring process. Kasi as you can notice, we need oxygen para ma-convert natin ng ATP. But the question is, does cellular respiration still occur without oxygen? Yes, definitely. And we call them fermentation, no? Or cellular respiration without oxygen. So yung mga, if you notice, we have fermented products, no? In humans, kung walang oxygen, gumagamit tayo ng energy without oxygen or naubusan tayo ng oxygen, so what you notice actually isasakit yung katawan natin or yung muscles natin, and that is because of respiration without oxygen. And in plants and animals, like for bacteria, yung mga yogurt o yung mga caused by lactic acid, no? Those are fermented milk, or wine, for instance, or vinegar. Those are fermented products na nag-undergo ng respiration without the oxygen. So let's learn more about respiration. But in comparison to transpiration, it's not the same. No, sometimes we interchangeably use respiration and transpiration or misunderstood. So when you say transpiration, it's very different from respiration because it is the evaporation of water in the leaves or in the plants. So that's transpiration. Kung mainit masyado, so what happened is that yung mga waters inside the plant will evaporate outside, no, in the air. So those are two different things. So in what kind of organisms does cellular respiration takes place? Of course, it occurs in both plants and animals, as I have said in the first earlier. So in plants, these are happening in autotrophs or the self-producers. In animals, we are heterotrophs or we are the consumers of plants for energy. So we derive our energy from the plants and animals that we eat. And cellular respiration occurs in mitochondria. This is the organelle where cellular respiration takes place. So this is the structure of the mitochondria with cristae and membranes and matrix. So we also have a redox reaction, not the same with photosynthesis, wherein there is transfer of one or more electrons from one reactant to another. So there are two types of oxidation of two types of this redox reaction. From we have reduction, and dox, we have oxidation. So again, oxidation reaction is the loss of electrons from a substance or the gain of oxygen. And this is found here in this equation, no? Wherein in oxidation, yung ating 6 carbon is nag-gain ng oxygen, but with the loss of electrons. And in the reduction reaction naman, yung gain of electrons to a substance or the loss of oxygen. So itong oxygen natin ay nawala, no, through reduction or gain of electrons, no, naging 2 oxygen na siya ang oxygen. So the breakdown of cellular respiration have 4 main parts reaction actually. So like photosynthesis, they have 3 phases, but for cellular respiration, meron tayong 4 na reaction. We have first the glycolysis or the splitting of sugar, and this is happens in cytosol just outside the mitochondria. And we have the second one, the grooming phase or the migration from cytosol to matrix. And the third one is the Krebs cycle. So remember, Krebs cycle is different from the Calvin cycle. So the Krebs cycle is also known as citric acid cycle, and it's also being done in the mitochondrial matrix. Now we have the last one is the electron transport chain or the ATC and oxidative phosphorylation, also known as the chemiosmosis. So we also have discussed this on the previous lessons on photosynthesis, and this is being done in the mitochondrial membrane. So let's talk about the first one, which is glycolysis. This occurs in the cytosol again, outside the mitochondria, and this involves 10 steps. So una is the preparatory phase. These are the first 5 steps in the energy investment phase, and the second one is the energy yielding phase or the energy payoff phase, which has 5 steps. In the energy investment phase, so this is what happened, no? The glucose is converted to produce 2 ATP, no? And so nagiging ang glucose nagiging glyceraldehyde phosphate. And we have in the energy yielding phase the glyceraldehyde phosphate, 2 to 3 carbons, again produces 4 ATP para maging pyruvate siya. And so the total net yield ng ATP na makukuha natin sa glycolysis ay 2 ATP and 2 NADPH. NADH lang. So On the substrate level phosphorylation, the ATP is formed when an enzyme transfers a phosphate group from a substrate to ADP. Halimbawa, we have the PEP to PYR. No, the substrate PEP with the help of an enzyme, no, magiging product niya ay pyruvate. Yan. And in the fermentation, this will occur not in the mitochondria, but in the cytosol without the oxygen. And it's called anaerobic. Aerobic or anaerobic respiration, yung dalawang type ng respiration natin. So, yung usual is yung aerobic respiration. Yung anaerobic respiration is called fermentation. So, remember that the glycolysis is part also of fermentation pa din, no? And this have two types. We have alcohol fermentation, yung sinasabi ko kanina, yung mga wines natin is alcohol fermentation. Yung second type is the lactic acid fermentation, yung fermented natin na mga milk products like yogurt are lactic acid fermentation. So this is what is being done in alcohol fermentation, wherein plants and fungi can produce beer and wine products through producing ATP in the glycolysis, no? To produce, and because of, without the presence of oxygen, ang kanilang glucose ay nagiging, nagpo-produce ng ethanol. Kaya nagiging wine siya or beer. And end products ng alcohol fermentation contain 2 ATP, 2 carbon dioxide, at 2 ethanol. So in the lactic acid fermentation naman, this occurs in animals, no? Even in humans, no? Pain, kaya nagkakaroon, yung sinabi ko kanina, nagkakaroon tayo ng pain in the muscle kapag nag-workout tayo, and that is because lack of oxygen. Nagkakaroon tayo ng lactic acid fermentation. So wherein glucose will produce 2 lactic acid, no? With 2 ATP. So ito yung end product, 2 ATP and 2 lactic acids. So the next step is the grooming phase, wherein oxygen is present pa din, and the 2-pyruvate 3 carbon molecules are transported at this time sa mitochondria membrane na sa matrix, and they are converted into 2-acetyl coenzyme molecules. So I know you have discussed this one during your chemistry, if you have chemistry in college, but definitely in high school meron talagang chemistry. And the end products in the grooming phase are 2 NADH, 2 carbon dioxide, at 2 acetyl coenzyme, 2 carbon. And in the third phase, the Krebs cycle, or also known as the citric acid cycle, it is again done in the mitochondrial matrix, wherein the acetyl coenzyme bonds to oxaliacetic acid, the 4 carbon, to make citrate naman. And it will take 2 turns ng Krebs cycle para ma-oxidize ang isang glucose inside the mitochondrial matrix. So this is what happened in the whole process of Krebs cycle. So yung acetyl again will be converted into citrate and so on, mag-produce ng ATP, ADP, at saka FADH2 para maging OAE. No? This is just for one turn. And in the second turn, magpo-produce na siya ng citrate. So total net yields niya ay 2 ATP, 6 NADH, 2 FADH, at 4 na carbon dioxide. And lastly, in the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation or chemiosmosis, this is being done in the mitochondrial membrane na. And this will use cytochrome proteins, ATP synthase, and enzyme to make ATP. So dito, meron sa ETC, magpapump ng hydrogen protons across inner membrane, then maglo-lower yung pH inside the membrane. Then the hydrogen ions then move via diffusion proton motive force through ATP synthase para ma-produce yung ATP. So if you remember the video presentation, yung mga animation, this is what actually being discussed there. And all the NADH and FADH are converted to ATP during the stage of cellular respiration. And NADH is converted na to through ATP, while FADH to ATP. And this will again enter to another ATC at a lower level na. So we just have 10 minutes left. In case na mag-off tayo, just go back to the link if you have questions or clarification, no? If none, then I'm going to see you again next meeting. Okay? So we still have 9 minutes. So to continue, we have electron transport chain, ATC, and oxidative phosphorylation or chemiosmosis is happening actually at this site na, no? So sorry for that. So again, in the ETC, the last ito yung mga proton pumping inside the matrix and the membrane, no, para ma-produce na yung lower concentration, hydrogen concentration to produce ATP. So that is what actually happened, and this has been discussed already in the video presentation. So again, this is the NADH, and this is for the FADH. So the same proton pumping. And now the total yield for ATP has 4 and 34 ATP during the oxidative phosphorylation, and a total of 38 ATP lahat actually. So in eukaryotes, or yung plants or organisms with nucleus or have membranes, has a total of 36 ATP, no? From every step, from glycolysis hanggang Krebs cycle, no? But and this is shown here. How does this maximum ATP yield for the eukaryotes is being done? So starting from glycolysis, you can see 2 ATP here, 4, 6, 18, 40, 42 hanggang naging 36 ATP for eukaryotes. And for prokaryotes naman, or those organism na walang membrane, no, meron silang mas madaming ATP, which is 38, no, from glycolysis to Krebs cycle. So the question is, in addition to glucose, what other various food molecules can be used in cellular respiration? Since we are always talking of glucose as our substrate molecule. So is that possible that they can use as other molecules other than glucose? Okay, yes, of course. So for the catabolism of various food molecules, we have also other organic molecules na magagamit natin as fuel. No, we have carbohydrates, or the polysaccharides, the fats or glycerols and fatty acids, and the proteins or amino acids. As you notice, glucose is carbohydrates, no? And carbohydrates is a polysaccharide. So glucose is a simple carbohydrate. So unang gamitin ng ating katawan or ng ating cell are actually yung mga carbohydrates. Pag naubusan or naubusan ng carbohydrates, the next thing na utilize na ay yung mga fats. And lastly, yung mga proteins. Kaya kung papayat ka ng papayat, mawawalan ka ng muscle in the end pag nawala na yung carbohydrates and fats sa body mo. No? So I guess that would be all about cellular respiration. It's just very, these are very detailed, but then all you have to understand are the basic steps. No? Why do we need to use the energy? So para makapag tayo, of course, para makapag makagalaw tayo in order to continue our growth and development, even for animals and plants, we need ATP or energy. So to do this, the process of respiration is being done by our body and by all organisms, no? Para ma-provide every time yung ating ATP, no? So again, between eukaryotes and prokaryotes, who produces more ATP in terms of cellular respiration? Anyone? Mga kuan kay mo ay hilumon kay mo kanina pa mo. Yes, J-Cell. Yes, J cell. Is it the prokaryotes or the eukaryotes? It's the prokaryotes, no? Yes, kasi the eukaryotes can only produce 36 ATP. So saan kaya sila saan yung difference nila? So dito sa second na steps, no? Which is 2, 4, 6. But in the prokaryotes kasi they have 2, 6, 6. So ito yung difference nila dito sa second step. No? So do you have any questions or clarification? We still have 4 minutes to answer your questions and clarifications. Do you have any questions or clarifications? Anyone?
Wala, ma'am.
Okay, so klaro ba, nasabtan ba tanan ang atong respiration? So what are again the two types of respiration? We have
2 types.
those are the two types of organisms, no? But when we say types of respiration, we have aerobic respiration. That is the usual and the common respiration with the presence of oxygen. And we also have anaerobic respiration, yun yung fermentation. If you remember fermentation here, in fermentation, that is anaerobic respiration. It's called anaerobic. So meron tayong alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, both in plants and animals. Ang alcohol fermentation is done in plants and lactic acid fermentation is in animals, no? So yun yung dalawang type without oxygen. Kaya nagkakaroon tayo ng mga wine products and beer products, while in lactic acid fermentation, nagkakaroon tayo ng milk, fermented milk products, and even yung ating mga vinegar, no? Acetic acid. So, some more question before we end. We only have 2 minutes. Wala kayong tanong?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so if wala kayong tanong, so that would be all for this 12 noon session, and mamaya may 5 p.m. session na naman kami. So thank you very much for your attendance this noon, and I hope to see you again on Thursday for the next lesson. Okay? So again, thank you, and see you again next meeting.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.